In my personal opinion, I regard Interactive Brokers as one of the finest brokerage platforms for investment purposes. However, there exists an aspect that numerous individuals fail to grasp when they register and intend to commence their investment journey. It is a rather straightforward matter, yet in comparison to other brokerage services, it has the potential to become somewhat intricate. We are discussing commissions. And typically, when you enter a brokerage platform to invest, they inform you that the commission rate is 0.3%, which is acceptable, or 0.2 cents per share. However, in this context, there is an element referred to as monthly volume. There is additionally something known as Interactive Brokers Pro, which offers a tiered commission structure as well as a fixed commission structure. Moreover, there exists the light version, which would significantly simplify our lives since it essentially has no commissions whatsoever. Nevertheless, this is specifically designed for investing in stocks and ETFs and is exclusively accessible to residents of the United States, so evidently this is an option that does not pertain to us. Earlier, I created a video where I delved into this topic, and I will incorporate it later in this very video, providing a detailed explanation so you can fully comprehend it. This is intended for individuals who enjoy gaining knowledge and understanding, and I elaborated on how the tiered commission structure and fixed commission operate, as well as which option might be more advantageous for you. So, I am going to leave that particular video below. Let's say it contains information from nearly a year ago, but it remains precisely the same. Nevertheless, I highly recommend that you stay until the conclusion, because I am going to demonstrate something that I genuinely appreciate and wish to share with each one of you. Now, to gain a deeper understanding before we delve directly into the entire subject of fees, we must discuss two memberships, so to speak, that exist within Interactive Brokers. I refer to them as memberships, but please do not interpret it literally. I say it merely to assign them some kind of designation. We could even refer to them as categories to make it more explicit. For instance, the initial category would be Interactive Brokers Lite, where they will not impose charges for stock acquisitions, whereas in Interactive Brokers Pro, which is the other category, they will impose charges. What distinguishes these two options? The primary distinction is that the Lite version is exclusively available to individuals residing within the United States and is specifically tailored for retail investors rather than for those who manage substantial volumes and execute significant investments. If Interactive Brokers were to ascertain that you are participating in very large-scale investments, they would naturally request you to transition to Interactive Brokers Pro. However, as I previously mentioned, there is this requirement of being a US resident. Consequently, for this particular video, we will concentrate on Interactive Brokers Pro because I assume that the majority of us watching this video do not necessarily possess US residency. So let's delve into discussing the commission specifically for stocks and ETFs. Firstly, we have the various locations where we can invest within Interactive Brokers. There are different exchanges globally, with the primary one being the United States. However, as you can observe here in North America, we also have Canada and Mexico. If we proceed further, we can explore Europe and examine all the investment options available within Europe, as you can see here. On this occasion, I will primarily explain the US table, but to be quite honest, if you comprehend the US table, you can essentially understand all the others because they are quite similar. Some are even simpler in comparison, like Mexico's, because certain commission aspects do not apply, simplifying the calculation. And in Europe, it's more of the same, as you can see here, except we would concentrate on the Euro section in the case of Europe. So there we have that, and then we also have Asia, as you can see here. Well friends, now that we've got this concept, let's move on, as I mentioned before, to explain the US table. Here, the first question is, why will we incur charges? Certainly, we will incur expenses for our investments, and these investments will be quantified in terms of shares, specifically in stocks, as demonstrated here. So, what occurs subsequently? Depending on the precise number of shares we possess within a particular transaction, which refers to a buying or selling activity, a specific commission will be applied, as illustrated here on the right side. This occurs because at Interactive Brokers, there are two distinct categories within the Pro category, the tiered category and the fixed category, which is the one depicted here. Once we grasp this, the figures that appear here on the left represent the number of shares we are acquiring in a transaction. Therefore, as you can see in this example, for 300,000 shares or fewer, we will incur charges, and we will explore this more thoroughly. However, prior to moving forward, I would like us to concentrate on a crucial aspect. As you can observe in this section where we were examining the monthly volume, there are two figures, 1 and 7, and beneath them we have additional figures, 4 and 8. These numbers fundamentally assist in offering an explanation for us, enabling us to comprehend this more effectively. How do we locate these figures? We merely need to scroll downwards and there will be an available option labeled Disclosures, where we have the opportunity to read everything that is displayed here in accordance with the number. Once you comprehend that, I suggest that you proceed to read this thoroughly. Now let's ascend here and grasp the subsequent information. Initially, we must bear in mind the most crucial aspect of all, which is the minimum amount per order and the maximum amount per order, because due to this, we will determine how much it will cost us to execute a purchase or sale. Let's commence with the tiered system to gain a comprehensive understanding of its operation, and we shall utilize an example stock for this purpose. The stock in question will be Nu, this particular stock that is presently valued at 685. Let's return to Interactive Brokers and proceed with the subsequent actions. We shall calculate based on levels for commission and by 1% in both the tiered system, which is the one that operates by levels, as well as with the fixed system. But before getting into that, you're probably wondering, what do you mean by 1% and by commission? Isn't it just a commission and that's it? Well, to understand this, let's delve deeper into something important that I mentioned, which is the minimum per order and the maximum per order. The minimum fee that they will impose upon us for executing a purchase or sale of stocks within the tiered system amounts to 0.35 cents, whereas in the fixed system, it is precisely $1. At this particular juncture, we encounter certain asterisks that we will examine in detail, since it indicates that the maximum they are permitted to charge us is 1% of the trade's total value. This is where we distinguish when I mention levels by commission. I am referring to these specific commissions here, and when I mention levels by 1%, I am referring to this aspect over here. Do not worry if you have not comprehended up to this point. We are proceeding to point 8 to grasp it more thoroughly. Let us scroll down and peruse what is here. We will copy it, translate it, and position it here on the right. Now, let us return to the commission system to comprehend it. And it states that if the maximum calculated per order is less than the minimum per order, then perhaps you are perplexed. But do not worry, because we will go through it step by step. It states if the maximum calculated per order, meaning the maximum calculated per order would be this one here, 1% of the trade, meaning if this value here of the maximum per order is less than the minimum per order, meaning that taking 1% of the total investment value results in less than 0.35. It states then the maximum per order will be charged, meaning it would be logical to charge this one here, 1% of the trade value. They provide us with an example here, but later we will conduct another one. It states, for instance, a purchase to acquire 10 shares valued at $0.20, meaning 20 cents, will be charged 0.02, meaning the 10 shares for the value here. This is performing the calculation with the fixed category, let us say, and it informs us that ultimately we would have to pay $0.02, but if we calculated it this way, we would actually have to pay 0 and cent, but since the 1% meaning taking 1% from here is less because it equals 0.02 to the 0.5, they would charge us here. They would indeed charge us the 1%. We will comprehend this soon, do not worry, there are examples everywhere. However, one very important aspect to bear in mind before proceeding to the base example is that remember there are other types of commissions or fees that they can impose upon us here, and in the case of the fixed one, correct? At this particular moment, a number of you might be pondering which option is more advantageous for your circumstances. Truthfully, that is contingent upon each individual. Personally, I utilize and prefer the tiered system, although on occasion the fixed system proves to be more effective. Nevertheless, the majority of individuals generally opt for the tiered system. One crucial aspect to highlight is that when you register with Interactive Brokers, they will initially establish you with this level, and the fixed category will indeed impose this charge upon you. Now, let's do the example with what I mentioned about the NU stock. So let's open this up here. Let's also open the calculator, and I believe that by illustrating it, you'll understand it better. So let's say here that the NU stock costs 6. 85 at this moment, right? Now we're going to do it by levels. So how would it be calculated by levels? First by commission, meaning what's here? This thing over here. So for example, if I'm going to buy 50 shares, that's equal to, let's see how much 6.85 times $50 for 50 shares is. Sorry, it would be 342.5. This would be the amount in dollars that I would be buying of NU shares, so well, up to there, everything is fine. Now, how do we do the calculation since I'm going to buy 50 shares? Well, what I'm going to do is in the levels by commission, I'm going to pay attention to the number of shares I'm buying, less than 300,000 or equal to 300,000, between 300,001 and 3 million, or what quantity? Maybe some of you here might say that's too much, I will never make any transaction with that amount of shares, but remember that there are those called penny stocks, which are shares that have a very low value. And since they have a very low value, it's very easy to reach this amount of shares for buying or selling. So let's incorporate it into the commission levels. In this particular scenario, the quantity of shares would be 50 multiplied by the commission that would be imposed. Since it's under 300,000, it would be, and I simply press enter and it indicates it's 0.7. So let's place this here. Nonetheless, typically when it emerges like this, it has a tendency to round up and would ultimately become 0.18 to be precise. Now let's proceed to place the 1% levels right over here. The 1% is determined by calculating the total sum I'm planning to invest, which amounts to 342.5. Subsequently, I take the 342.5 and compute 1% of it by multiplying it by 0.01, resulting in 3.425. So what transpires here? I am going to introduce an additional element here referred to as commission. So what transpires in this situation? Initially, we do not adhere to rule number 8, which we had reviewed previously, which stated that if this particular value was lesser than this, then they would impose this charge on me. However, it doesn't imply that because this value is greater, they will impose this charge over here. No, it doesn't signify that. But what it does signify is that observe here, because there are instances when neither of the two rules complement one another. And as you can observe here, this value here is exceedingly high. So rule number 8, they placed here wouldn't be applicable, and this value here is quite low. Why? Because the minimum charge per order is set at 0.35, which is the amount they are supposed to charge me. So what occurs in this scenario? They will not charge me 0.18 nor 3.42. Instead, they will impose a charge of 0.35, which is appropriate since it is the minimum per order. In fact, further down, they provide some illustrative examples. But let's now transition to the fixed model to gain a clearer understanding. In the fixed model, it's essentially the same. Only the values shift slightly, and for the commission, it's once again 50 shares that will multiply by the fixed rate, which equals 0.25, resulting in 25 cents. Then the fixed rate remains practically the same, because we comprehend here that since it's 342 and represents 1% and is the same amount of the purchase I'm planning to make, it ultimately remains the same. However, here, another situation arises, and it's that since the minimum commission in this instance is $1, theoretically they should charge me $1. Why? Because this commission over here is not less than the commission over there, so what they would end up charging me here is $1, so $1 here, and in the tiered one, they would charge me 0.35 under this regulation we've set here. Obviously, the tiered commission would be more worthwhile, but it doesn't mean that in 100% of cases it will be like this, so keep that in mind. Once we understand this, we need to look at other types of fees they charge us. Not directly Interactive Brokers, but entities like the SEC or FINRA. I could explain this in other videos because it really requires more depth and it would take us about 2 hours here, so we'll leave that aside for now. The commissions on ETFs also bring some examples that I want us to see here. So when we come here, we fully understand everything because it tells us here, let's go from bottom to top, and by doing this calculation, if you already understood, I invite you to pause the video and then do the calculation based on what you've understood to see if it matches exactly what it says here. Because here it tells us that if we buy 1,000 shares at 0.25, the commission would be $250. So based on what you've understood up to this point, do the calculation, pause the video, and if it gives you $250, it means you've learned and understood. But well, in this case, we're going to do it ourselves. So what can we do first? Let's calculate it in both ways. The first is the commission. And remember, here we are with examples of the fixed model. That is the model that charges us regardless of the number of shares. So keeping that in mind, let's go back here and do the first calculation. So as there are 1,000 shares, that is less than 300,000, and in the fixed model, there's only one commission, let's multiply this by 0, and this gives us $5. So here we say, but why if it says 250 here? Well, because this commission model doesn't apply here, because here it applies that 1% is less than the commission per commission, so to speak. And if we're going to do the calculation here, we have to multiply 0.25, which is what each share costs, by 1,000, and here it gives us the total amount we'd be investing. And if we multiply this by 0.1, which is to get 1%, it would be $2.5, meaning that rule 8 would apply, which you can go back and read, which says that if 1% is less than the minimum commission, blah blah blah, they would charge us that. So up to there, all good. I think most people will have a problem with this first one here because that's where a bit of confusion arises. So let's go with the second one. Now it's 1,000 shares at $25. So how does it work? 1,000 shares, which is what we are buying again. So it is assumed that the commission is $5, and here it does match exactly. Why? Because the other rule, the 1% one, does not apply here. If we multiply 25 shares, no, not 25, it would be 1,000 shares at $25. That would be $25,000 we are investing. If we take 1% of this, we will realize that 1% would be $250, which means the charge would be exorbitant, so a $5 commission applies. Now let's move on to the first one, which causes the most headaches, and when I was understanding this, honestly it's complicated. So being sincere, for those who are going to invest here, think it over, consider if you really want to invest here. It's a very good broker, it has many exchanges, it has many things available, but at the same time it's complex to fully understand all this. Besides, these are not the only commissions. We have to talk about others later on, so I don't know. Let's continue here. Let's calculate this one. And this is 100 shares at $25. So let's go with the first example, $100, 100 shares. Sorry, what will the commission be? We press enter and it tells us it's 50 cents. So one might say, but here they're charging me $1. What happened? Well, let's erase and now let's put it the other way, which is 20. Well, it's 100 shares at $25, which is $2,500. We take 1% of that and it gives us $25. And here they're not charging me either 50 cents or $25. And why does this happen? Because this value here, the 1%, is not lower than this one. Then point number 8 would no longer make sense. And besides, the value of calculating it with this base here, with this selection base, is lower than this base here. So what happens is that they would take the minimum per order and end up charging me $1 for what I would be investing, and that's how it works here. Obviously, you can see the same thing in Canada. Different rules apply here. Always read the small numbers that appear here. Go and look for them because different things apply. But in general, most of the tables that appear here, for example, in Europe, we will notice that in a country like, I don't know, let's see how Germany applies in a quite similar way. But what changes is the issue of the number of shares. As you can see here we are already talking about 50 million. Practically we are talking with different percentages. We are no longer talking about specific amounts. So let's say that's what changes. But in the long run, the calculation is quite similar. And it is very easy to perform if you understand the previous table. And well, once you've seen this entire video that I've just left you here, let's move on to what I wanted to show you, which is the commission calculator that I made. And this video you've just seen, as I told you, I've been doing it for some time simply for the stocks and ETFs calculator because, as some know, obviously in Interactive Brokers we have options, we have futures, and we have some other types of assets to invest in. So what happens here? I made this calculator and honestly I kept it private. To be frank, I'm not a programmer or anything like that. This is all based on something called bytecoding, or in simple terms, programming in quotes, because as I said, I'm not a programmer. It's more about doing these kinds of things with artificial intelligence by providing the information and instructions. So I managed to do this, and keep in mind that this is 100% indicative. It doesn't specifically tell you how much you'll be charged because there are many factors to consider, but it can give you a rough idea since the figure might be quite close to what you could actually be charged. So I'm going to explain how it works and also leave you the link in the description for Interactive Brokers if you're interested in creating an account. As I mentioned, for me, it's one of the best brokers because it offers many options, a lot of security, and strong backing, as evidenced by its years of experience in the market and the fact that it is publicly traded. I'll also leave you the link to this calculator so you can try it out. First of all, this is set up for you to choose your region or country. So this doesn't necessarily mean, for example, if you're from Colombia or Chile, your country will appear here. What I mean by your region or country is the market of your region or country in which you will invest. That is, if you are going to invest in a stock that is listed on the US Stock Exchange, then you will choose the one that appears here. Next, we will choose between fixed and tiered pricing. This is the same as what appears here, fixed. Excuse me. I was looking at funds and needed to switch to stocks and ETFs. This is about tiered pricing and fixed commission, so you will choose between these two to see how much you will be charged. Keep in mind that in the tiered structure, regulatory fees, exchange fees, clearing fees, and pass-through fees are considered. In the fixed commission section, there are regulatory charges that I have probably mentioned to you earlier in this video. Now let's imagine it's by tiers and we'll put here that it's this list of exchanges, then the operation will be a purchase or a sale, the amount will be in how many shares. So let's suppose we're going to buy 100 shares and the price of the share we're going to buy is $12. And whether it's an ETF or not, this mainly applies to two issues. The first is in the United Kingdom, where in some parts of the UK the tax issue does not apply, but it's also for the following reason. There are ETFs without commissions when you enter the Interactive Brokers page, which tells us that depending on certain ETFs, that money might be refunded. So it's well explained here, but we would have to look into it. In this case, I'm going to set it to no, and that these are simply stocks in which I'm going to invest. In case you want to add other ETFs that you might want to include depending on the type of investment you're going to make, you can leave it there and in the same way, the fixed fee, but in this case, we're going to leave it at 0 and click calculate. Here, it automatically gives us the result that the market is the United States. In this case, which category would we fall into among all these that appeared here? Obviously, it depends on what you input, because if you make a purchase of more than 300,000 shares, a different type of commission will apply, and all the other commissions, which are more regulatory, will be taken into account. As I mentioned, this applies to the tiered structure. Now, if we look at the fixed structure, we see that here it charges us 0.37, including the commission from Interactive Brokers plus all the regulatory ones. If we calculate it again with the fixed structure, it tells us it would be $1.02. This way, we find out the commission that might be charged. As I mentioned, this is just a guideline, but I have personally been using it, and it is quite helpful. It means you don't have to log into the application and check it yourself. In fact, you can check it yourself, but this is very useful to see in advance, or even if you're not yet registered with Interactive Brokers, it helps a lot to see it. The other thing is changing it from quantity to price. So what does that mean? Now, we are not going to go by the number of shares, but by the amount of money to invest. So it could be that you want to make a purchase, but you don't know exactly how many shares you are going to buy, but you have, for example, $5,000 to invest. Here you put the price per share. Let's suppose it's $25. You click calculate, and now it will give you a new calculation based on the amount of money you entered, no longer by shares. This is very useful when we go by a specific amount of money. For example, $1,235. You click calculate. As I said, this is 100% indicative and you have to keep it in mind. It may fail on some occasions, but it serves as a guide regarding the amount of commission that might be charged and to compare it with other brokers. There is something that needs improvement here, and that is, if you notice in the monthly volume, there is a volume from 300,001 to 3 million shares, which we haven't added yet because, generally speaking, I personally, as I mentioned, tend to invest and use the calculator and don't invest in more than 300,000 shares, so I didn't see it necessary until now. But if you see it necessary, I receive many comments. Let me know if you want us to add more options. I feel this is sufficient for the vast majority of people unless they invest in penny stocks, meaning stocks with a very low value, and it's very easy to reach more than 300,000 shares per month. If so, leave it in the comments and we will update this, because honestly the idea is that this takes me a bit to do and doesn't get damaged, because sometimes when you do this kind of thing, you tend to change things and suddenly it breaks. So that's why it's somewhat somewhat complex when making changes, but if you require it, leave it in the comments. Also, you can choose here, and it would help me a lot. As I mentioned, I've been using it personally, and it's worked for me, giving me quite close calculations. But obviously, like any application or development someone makes, over time, if someone uses it, they notice errors and say, this calculation here is not right, meaning it's not like you will click here to calculate and not put this here and say, no, look, Interactive Brokers charged me 1.04 flat, and it didn't charge me those 51 cents. Fix that, because it's very difficult to consider all that. But if it comes close, I'm quite happy with that. I mean, errors like charging you 0.01 when in reality it's going to charge you $1, then yes, we would have to solve that. Depending on what you need, I can configure it here so we can improve this calculator little by little. And obviously the design, as I said, is something I created for myself, something I didn't plan to publish, but I've been analyzing it and I looked for options like this. And it's not like many people have thought about it or it's on any platform. Again, this is something indicative. If it helped you, leave it in the comments and let me know if you invest in a broker, what you think about it, and if you're going to start investing in it or not. Leave all your comments and also leave me a lion emoji in the comment section to know who made it to the end of the video and to know precisely who are those most loyal ones who always stay until the end. See you on the next occasion. Goodbye.